We're always here.
Welcome back to the show. We're going to take you straight to a press conference that is being held by the South African President with news about Nelson Mandela. We don't believe it's good news, but let's go to that press conference right now.
Nothing can diminish our sense of a profound and enduring loss. His tireless struggle for freedom earned him the respect of the world. His humility, his compassion, and his humanity earned him their love. Our thoughts and prayers are with the Mandela family. To them, we owe a debt of gratitude. They have sacrificed much and endured much so that our people could be free. Our thoughts are with his wife, Mrs. Graça Machel, his former wife, Miss Winnie Madikizela Mandela, with his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and the entire family. Our thoughts are with his friends, comrades, and colleagues who fought alongside Madiba over the cause of a lifetime of struggle. Our thoughts are with the South African people who today mourn the loss of the one person who, more than any other, came to embody their sense of a common nationhood. Our thoughts are with the millions of people across the world who embraced Madiba as their own and who saw his cause as their cause. This is the moment of our deepest sorrow. Our nation has lost its greatest son. Yet, what made Nelson Mandela great was precisely what made him human. We saw in him what we seek in ourselves. And in him, we saw so much of ourselves. Fellow South Africans, Nelson Mandela brought us together, and it is together that we will bid him farewell. Our beloved Madiba will be accorded a state funeral. I have ordered that all flags of the Republic of South Africa be lowered to half-mast from tomorrow, 6 December, and to remain at half-mast until after the funeral. As we gather to pay our last respects, let us conduct ourselves with the dignity and respect that Madiba personified. Let us be mindful of his wishes and the wishes of his family. As we gather wherever we are in the country and wherever we are in the world. Let us recall the values for which Madiba fought. Let us reaffirm his vision of a society in which none is exploited, oppressed, or dispossessed by another. Let us commit ourselves to strive together, sparing neither strength nor courage, to build a united, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and prosperous South Africa. Let us express, each in our own way, the deep gratitude we feel for a life spent in service of the people of this country and in the cause of humanity. That is indeed the moment of our deepest sorrow. Yet, it must also be the moment of our greatest determination. A determination to live as Madiba has lived, to strive as he has strived, and to not rest until we have realized his vision of a truly united South Africa, a peaceful and prosperous Africa, and a better world. We will always love you, Madiba. May your soul rest in peace. God bless Africa. Nkosi sikelele Africa. I thank you.
Well, that is sad news of the passing of Nelson Mandela. He's obviously been sick for some time now, but for him to have passed away now, it really does reach down into your heart, doesn't it?
Certainly does. 95 years of age. This is a man who shaped a nation and absolutely inspired a planet.
Well, changed the world in many ways. Rob Penfold was there when he was released from prison. Rob, it's tough news to take, isn't it?
Yeah, good morning, Carl. And it is indeed, yes. It's one of those, we sort of had been expecting this for some time. Having been down there, we went down there when he was first ill as well, thinking that this may be happening. And now that they've announced the news, we understood that they really took him home in many ways to die as well. They didn't think that they could do any more for him at the hospital at the time. And so they nursed him at home instead, because he always said and told his family that he did want to die at home if at all possible.
Rob, you were there when Mandela was released. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was an extraordinary time. It happened very suddenly. It was one Sunday. I was in London at the stage, and the news came out that, yes, Mandela was indeed going to be set free. Up until then, we hadn't even seen photos of him. Up until then, what had happened was that the South African government had ensured that he was being kept away and kept out of the eye of the population as well, hoping, of course, that the population might almost forget the man. But, of course, that never happened. And but what we did start to see, probably about a month or so before he was released, we started to see actual drawings of him, which were obviously drawings taken from a real photo, which we understand now that the South African government had allowed to be released. In other words, just giving the heads up that something was about to happen. But boy, they were extraordinary seeing me when he eventually came home to Soweto, and we were able to stand outside the house there as he came home. At the time, the people there were just absolutely, you can imagine, just celebrating the life of Mandela. Just couldn't believe that once again that this man was back in their lives. And I went back to Soweto a couple of months ago now to visit, and the home where we waited to see him come back to now is now the Mandela Museum as well. And boy, has it changed now. It's a big tourist location as well. Up until then, certainly when we were there, when he first came out, it was one of the houses in amongst the slums there of Soweto. But extraordinary situation there, wonderful excitement, and probably for me, the memory of Mandela will be the people celebrating outside his house and in the streets of Johannesburg, and the happy days, the wonderful time, and how he actually then went on and lifted the entire spirits of South Africa for many years to come, eventually becoming the president, and all the good that happened after that for the black population.
Well, even the fact today that we had a black president of South Africa announcing his death shows how far South Africa has come. But to go back to those times when he was arrested, when he was working for the ANC, trying to affect change, and certainly some members of the ANC during that period, it was very bloody. The government and its crackdown on the black population was truly awful. It was a genocide in parts. And for him to have been arrested and then to be imprisoned and to affect change from inside the walls of a prison was something remarkable.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. And, there was a lot of feeling that when he came out that there was real concern that eventually there might be even a civil war. It turned to the point where the whites, I know, were particularly concerned that they thought now that he would lead an uprising and eventually they would turn on the whites, and they really did feel as though there was going to be a war inside South Africa. And he was the one that came out and made it very clear, despite what has happened to me, despite the dramas that I've been, what I've suffered, I do not want any payback going on out here. But we learned fairly recently too that he in fact had been meeting with members of the white government for some time before he was released, and had agreed to the fact that he would eventually, when he got out, would be able to try to keep a lid on what was really a simmering situation there. And he was able to do that, as we know, and still to this day, they put down the fact that it was he that came out and he kept things calm. It was only the fact that he was able to, as I said, keep a lid on the situation, that the South Africa is the country that it is today.
His forgiveness was something that really was the mark of who he was, and was a large part of why people felt so inspired by him, Rob, because he had so much to be angry about, and yet from the moment he emerged from prison, it was all about affecting change and finding a way forward.
Yeah, that's right, and he made that very clear in the very first news conference that we went to. When he was first released, he went home to Soweto, and then he held a news conference a day or two later in Johannesburg. And it was in the speeches too that he made when he first came out in Cape Town as well, the first day out off the balcony there. Very much about, as you say, Lisa, just more or less saying there shall be no payback. South Africa has to change. It has to change for the positive. And the only way we're going to do it is for the blacks and the whites to pull together. He said, I'm prepared to be part of that program. And that's exactly what he did right through until he eventually became president and then passed on the presidency to others.
You know, he'd almost played the South African government towards the end of his incarceration into a corner because the world was starting to react against apartheid in a very significant and very motivated way, from rock stars to movie stars getting on board. Even the Australian government, I think, was one of the first. I think Bob Hawke led the charge for trade sanctions against South Africa. And that started to pick up momentum, more and more momentum. And then obviously the South African government thought, we've got to do something about this. And then once he was released, it was very much under the agenda of, well, you know what, he's done all of this, so I think we've got to roll with it a little bit. And then the changes started to happen for South Africa.
Yep, that's right. And a lot of South Africans at the time started to leave very quickly after he was released, thinking that things were going to go from bad to worse there. And a lot of the South Africans, of course, ended up, a lot of them came to Perth in the first place, and then moved over to Melbourne and Sydney after that as well. And but those who stayed, and I spoke to quite a few who stayed in that same area where Mandela now lives, well, they were saying that they're glad that they stayed on now because their families are still all there, and they felt as though they all said we felt as though we may have to fly from the place and never come back. But they said those of us know who stay have no regrets. They've been allowed to continue on with their businesses, and they say that they certainly haven't suffered as a result of Mandela's great leadership, and only his great leadership ever since he came out.